everybody. I'm Tamara Conway.
I'm Stephen Conway.
And welcome back to Stamina for Life. This is the segment where we're going to be telling you our story.
Otherwise known as episode number 2.
Yes.
Now, Tamara, why is it important for us to share our story?
I think it's important that people have an opportunity to hear our story, our background, and where we come from, and just how these principles that we're sharing have impacted and affected our lives.
Well, and also, we say more than that. This gives an opportunity for those who are going through this series with us to kind of know who we are. Yeah. Maybe if you already know who we are, if you spent time with us in our homes, then you've heard it and you get us.
Yeah.
But if you haven't, and this is your first time really having any type of interaction with us, we like to do this just because it helps you to get to know the people who are speaking to you. Yeah. It helps you to also remember that we're not in some ivory tower talking down to you and telling you about things that you need to do when we ourselves haven't actually experienced or gone through any challenges.
Yeah. So we are going to give you an opportunity to get to know us, but let's start here. This is us telling our story about where we come from, our childhood, and then we'll be right back.
I was born in 1978 in Cleveland, Ohio. My mother and father, they weren't married, but they were living together with a plan to be married when I was born. I came into the world already having a brother. When I was born, my brother was about 2 years old at that time. Most memories of my childhood I have, if I'm honest, they're good. There is one defining memory when I was about 7 or 8, however, that wasn't all that great. My older cousin and my brother and I were walking to the store to get some candy. There was this little girl down the street that I liked, same age as me, and on that day she's in her window. And my family that's supposed to love me, they turned on me that day. My cousin and my brother tell this little girl that I like her. It was slow motion, no joke. My eyes turned to hers, and all of a sudden she's like, "Ugh, he's ugly." Needless to say, I was devastated. This event, as small as it was, had a formative effect on me. You see, after that, I began to see myself the way this girl saw me. Now, I believe the world saw me the way she saw me. Even God saw me the way she saw me. This became the image I had of myself. I adopted her words as my image. From that time forward, every single thing I did was to change or get rid of that image. I needed to know I had value and I was desirable to someone. What did that mean for an inner city kid like me? You guessed it, girls. See, if that was how I got into this mess, then it made logical sense. That's going to be the way that I'm going to get out of it. All through high school, I used my relationships with girls and others, but especially girls, as the guide to my value and worth. Now, to tell you the truth, I was quite good at it, and so I felt real valuable at this time in my life. I had a very positive self-image because I was very successful in relationships with girls. But was this the path to manhood? Is this how a person becomes a good man? Could I be a good husband having this mindset? Was it going to affect my ability to actually have a lasting relationship with another woman? And what about fatherhood? Was this the path to becoming a great father? These questions and many more lingered on.
It has been said that the first 7 years of a child's life are the most formative. It is during this time that their character, their ideas about life and themselves is formed. If this is true, Surely my childhood set me up for more struggle mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Born to my newly married parents in May of 1978, adding a new child to their newly formed family was not easy. My mother, who had been a teen mom at 15, and having her second child a few years later from both abusive relationships, tried a second time to make marriage work. I was her third child and my dad's first, born into her second marriage, which was riddled with alcohol and abuse. The home, yeah, it was full of turmoil and stress. Surprisingly enough, what I learned as a child was to hide those things and pretend that none of it existed. I learned to smile and keep it moving. Everyone loves a happy girl, right? Although she was dying inside. My goal was to make everyone around me happy, never challenge the authority, and never speak up. Unfortunately, though, this also helped me to be a target for abuses. One of the most prevalent was sexual abuse. One of the biggest lies that I walked away with from these experiences was that my value was in my body and what I looked like. Beauty is what gave me value. It was the first thing that men seemed to recognize, and it seemed like it drew the attention. Confused by this, and yet accepting it, quickly it became the way I saw myself through the lens that was given to me, and I walked in it for quite some time. The things I witnessed and experienced in and out of the home, they laid the groundwork for me to detach myself and find comfort in dysfunctional things. Having gone through multiple separations in their marriage, my parents would eventually divorce when I was around 8 or 9 years old. As my father's alcoholism worsened, it seemed as though my mother's depression deepened. I trained myself not to need my father, or any man for that matter, and not to trust my mother or any person emotionally. Feeling abandoned and abused by men, and fighting to try and be the answer to my mom's brokenness and pain, I got lost emotionally, and I needed to figure out a way to survive. And for me, school, activities, and boys became that way. These temporary activities gave me a way out of the house and allowed me to create a new little world for myself, free from all that was happening at home. Kind of forming what some would say new family attachments, but never really filling the void completely. For some time, these things provided a way out for me, immersing myself in school and friends and extracurriculars. It made it all seem like it was melting away. On the inside, I was dying, but on the outside, everything seemed fine. I was really good at hiding, never sharing with anyone any of these things that had happened or were happening in my life. I carried these things silently, buried beneath the surface. As a young adult, or as I approached young adulthood, I found myself faced with some things that would surface, and I did not quite know how to deal with it. Making bad decisions, losing myself with achievements in school and scholarships, it all got quite confusing. Eventually, I ended up falling apart, trying to ignore the lava that was bubbling underneath. It spilled over into my education. I lost a scholarship. My relationship suffered, family, detachments from some, and forming unhealthy attachments with others, self-destructive behavior, and so much more. These things ran me into the arms of God. But could God really help me to excavate through it all? There was so much stuff. What was so deeply embedded within me, and I was trying to figure it out, but it was so hard. Things seemed to be generally a mess. The DNA seemed to carry so many generational curses, as well as my own personal decisions that ended up making me even more scarred and broken. Would I be able to have functional relationships, and would God be able to lead me to healing from these deep wounds?
Well, thanks for taking the time to see that portion of our story, right? Our childhood, our upbringing. But it doesn't end there, does it?
No, it doesn't. We at least for me, the real connection point was in high school, John Hay Senior High School.
Yes, go Hornets!
Now, Tamara says that she remembers, she knew me from the 9th grade. I don't remember her from 9th grade, but I did remember her from the 11th grade. That's when we had chemistry class together. Miss Coombs was our teacher, and had a good class. But that's where she caught my eye, so to speak, was in chemistry class.
I still remember the card you gave me for my birthday. Was it for my birthday?
Yeah, it was a birthday card.
Yeah,
Everybody
and it
talked
had the
about your
little-
birthday, and she kept that all those years afterwards. And so chemistry class is where we kind of got to know each other. And I was not living as a Christian. I've been raised in a Christian home, but I wasn't living as a Christian. I was chasing girls and chasing the next great event, parties, and just trying to keep my life occupied with having as much fun as I possibly could.
Yeah, and I was busy. I had a boyfriend, unfortunately, and I also was involved in, school activities, cheerleading, sports, and all those different things like that. So, we never dated, which was really interesting.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
we certainly didn't date in high school.
Yeah.
I guess, no, I wouldn't say I tried too hard in high school, but we certainly didn't date there. But then there was we graduated from high school.
The last day of school, remember what happened, right?
No, you tell us what happened.
Yes,
Tamara.
I'll tell you what happened the last day of school. We graduated, we're cleaning out our lockers, and we happened to have an encounter in a hallway with a good friend of ours, Mayo. And you were like, man, how am I going to remember you? Because when people leave high school, you don't know what they're going to do with their lives, right? And at that time, you were preparing to leave the state. Correct, and I was going to be going to school there. I had these ankle bracelets, and one of them had my name on it, and I took one off and gave it to him as a little token, to remember me by. So, that was the last time we actually saw each other for a while.
Yeah, and so one of the things that happened with that separation that summer, I ended up going out to the west part of the United States and working in a program, and during that program, my life was radically changed. I had what many Christians refer to as a conversion experience or a new birth experience. And so when I say my life was radically changed, I went from living in between, my girlfriend's home and, drug houses that were run by family members. I went from living in that situation to going out there to the West Coast to actually studying my Bible and praying and whatnot every day. So it was a drastic change that I experienced.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I came back, and because of the type of lifestyle I've been leading, one of the priorities in my life was, man, I gotta go be an influence for good now. I've been influence for so many of the wrong things and led so many people down wrong paths. Now I want to lead people on a different path. And so I started contacting people that we knew and reaching out to them and trying to share about my experience with them. And so I connected with one of the families, and this family actually lived on the street that I had spent a good number of years growing up on. And it was in the connection there with that family that I heard again about Tamara, because one of the daughters actually attended the same church that Tamara was attending. And they were like, oh, you remember her? We go to church. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's great. Yeah. So I really was keen, because now I know she has spiritual interest. And obviously because of what had taken place in my life and what I had gone through, I'm thinking, man, maybe I can share something that'll help.
Interestingly enough, while you were having that experience in your life, there was a lot going on in my life at the time too. Once we left high school, I had started college there in town, but I was still in a very dysfunctional relationship. I ended up getting pregnant. I ended up losing my college scholarship. I had an abortion. It was a lot of turmoil and stress, and I was just on a flaming train, that was going nowhere. And so all of those events also propelled me to seek God. There was no place else for me to run, I should say, and I'm so thankful that the Lord accosted me at that point in my life, and it kind of stopped me dead in my tracks and shifted me. It didn't happen all at once, but gradually the Lord was really working and changing in my life. So when you came back in town, it was really quite interesting to see how God had changed, you know, your life. And I remember the day that I got a chance to see you. You came downtown to the mall. I was working in the mall as a survey girl, and a friend of mine, you know, had came inside and said, hey, come outside, you want to see, you know, because we all went to school together. And lo and behold, it was you, and you looked different. You know, you looked interesting with that suit jacket on with that little rubber patch on the elbow. That I will never forget that.
That was suede. Suede.
I had never seen you, you know, look like this. You know, you looked like a man, and you looked different, you know, and you were talking different, you know, and we sat down at the table, and I remember us talking about life, and you said, you know, you'll never guess what I have, and you pulled out the bracelet and you set it on the table, you know. That was it was interesting, you know, and it's even still then I had no clue, you know, about what God was going to do. And I remember that you were leaving actually the next day to go to, was it Africa or Korea?
Yeah, I'm not
and
sure.
And I thought that was amazing too. You know, someone who had grown up in the inner city, in the hood where we grew up, had all these experiences, all the things that you were telling me that God had done for you, and places He had taken you. I thought that was so awesome. You know, so
it was also interesting because later on, I would discover, or I would find out that you and your best friend at the time had been looking through a yearbook,
Yeah.
and talking, reminiscing, laughing, and the question came up if there was anyone
Yes.
that you could reconnect with, or you would be interested in reconnecting with, to find out where they are and what they're doing, who would it be? And as they're flipping through and looking at all of the name that came off of your lips was actually my name.
Stephen Conway.
And so it was later on, only later on, would I realize that it was actually providential.
Yeah.
in terms of our paths crossing again.
It was literally a few days later
Mm-hmm.
where I got a phone call. And when I picked up the phone, and it was a man on the side, you know, a guy saying hello, and I'm like, who is this? You know, because I didn't really give my number out to a bunch of people, you know. And you were like, hey, it's Steve. And I'm like, Steve who? And you were like, Stephen Conway. That literally floored me, because I know the conversation I had just had with my friend a few days ago. Little did I know, you know, that experience, or that at that time, that we would have an opportunity to connect again. And it was you on the other line inviting us to come to a Bible study. You know, so that was really, it was awesome. It was good too, because, you know, as young people who had decided to give their hearts to God, you didn't really have a lot of friends, you know, to hang out with. You didn't want to live the same life you lived before. And so that was really exciting to hear, you know.
And I just want to bring this up, and we were talking about this actually earlier today when we were out on our walk. Not only had you committed yourself, or were you on the path of committing yourself to God, and I was on a path where I committed myself to God, but unbeknownst to us at that time, you know, I had made some radical choices because of the type of life that I used to live. And just to put it plainly and bluntly, the choice was that I'm not going to even be engaged in a romantic relationship until, you know, I feel like I'm in a place where I'm ready to be married. So that means I'm not trying to get with, you know, sister so-and-so so we can hold hands and, you know, we can kiss and we can do all of that. I'm not even trying to live that life, because I've been there and done that and beyond and more. And so I'm trying to do things in a different way, in a way ultimately that's going to be pleasing to God, and that's in my best interest and the best interest of the young woman that I'm involved in. So from, you know, there was about a 5-year period in my life where this doesn't mean that I didn't have, you know, friends that were young women and whatnot. Certainly I did, and classmates and people that I worked with and whatnot. But in terms of being romantically involved, for about 5 years, I cut that portion out, just because of where I had been and where I wanted to go. And you made some decisions that were similar in your life as well.
You know, and for me, unfortunately, even when I made the decision to give my heart to God, I still found myself having relationships with the gentlemen, even when ones who went to church, right? And so there were mistakes that were made there, but along those mistakes, I was learning, and God was really dealing with me, you know, what was leading me. One of the biggest things I learned was that just because someone says they love God doesn't mean, you know, that they are living it. So it taught me as a young woman to let people live out their faith before I just decide, you know what I'm saying, to take them at their word. And then it was maturing me, you know, teaching me about what it meant to really have value, you know, and worth, and how a young man was supposed to treat you, and how I was supposed to carry myself, you know. So it was a lot going on through that growth process, even while serving God.
Yeah. And I think that was interesting. And so I had gone away, and then I came back. I was supposed to have a job that fell through, and I ended up back in Cleveland, Ohio. I was playing in the basketball league, and had a complete tear of my Achilles tendon, which caused me to remain in town for 3 months after a surgery. And during that time, reconnected. I was leading out in Bible studies, prayer meetings, and whatnot, and preaching with a torn Achilles tendon and a cast on, and inviting Tamara and some other friends to some of those things.
Yeah.
And during that time, we did develop a deeper friendship.
Yeah, and funny enough, I actually developed a even deeper friendship with your mom, you know, because there was a point in time when you healed, you know. I still feel to this day that the Lord tore his Achilles tendon for me, but nonetheless.
Still haven't recovered.
But when you finally healed up and left, I still continued to have a close relationship with her. We had a lot in common, you know, and it was interesting. You know, I spent a lot of time with your family, you know, and that was one of those things, those periods in my life of growing, you know, me spiritually, my family background, as you saw the video earlier about where we come from, you know, a lot of different things were taking place in my healing process. And so that was a part of that. Yeah, spending time with your family.
Yeah. And the time that you spent with my mom was it was particularly advantageous because of a seminar that you guys attended.
Yes.
Or some training that you took.
For sure. Because we both, again, had similar backgrounds dealing with abuse and all those different things like that. We decided to take a class together, a suicide prevention class, so that we can work on the suicide hotline. Always wanted to be involved in things like that. And interestingly enough, you know what people say, you know, when there's something wrong with you, you want to tend to find out so that you can, and that was the avenue that we went on. And attending these classes, one of the things that happened was I was faced with some personal things that I had never dealt with in my life, you know, whether it was the sexual abuse or other different things, growing up in a dysfunctional home. And it was there that God really grabbed a hold of me and said, listen, you know, if you want to be able to help people the way you want to, if you want to be able to have the relationships that you want to, you're going to have to face this. You know, you can't call other people or have other people calling you and them needing help, and you haven't even faced your own demons, you know? And so, man, and I met someone there that I had known in my family, and God had transformed their life. It was just all providential, you know? And so from there began this process of me beginning to open up this baggage. We'll talk about this later on in my life that began the healing process for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about the healing, and that's such a, at least in my mind, it's a key component of not only our story, but it should be a key component of everyone's story, because and I just on that point, but just to give a little bit of background, I ended up moving away. And I was working down in Tennessee in the South, and you continued your relationship with my mother, Bible studies, so forth and so on, and you took another step in your faith journey and made a deeper commitment to the Lord and what have you, and that put you and I actually on a similar pathway. And my mom was coming down to visit me in Tennessee and told me that you were going to come along, and I'm like, well, what is she coming for? And she's like, well, she wants to, you know, she's a nice girl and she's my friend and she wants to come and visit and whatnot. And the craziness is, for me, because of the things that I had seen, I remember initially when I met you, I called and, you know, just trying to set up either a meeting or whatever. And, you know, I called several times, and just used to being a single young man who's trying to do the right thing, used to women responding in a certain way, and you didn't respond in that way. And so I was like, well, you know, man, what's going on? Is she really as serious about the Lord? Is she? And I remember your grandmother one time answering the phone and saying, you know, I'm sorry, baby, she not here. Has she still not called you back? I said, well, no, she hasn't. She said, oh, that girl, she just go to work and go to school and go to that church and stay at that church all day long. And I thought, I was supremely impressed and very much inquisitive now, because, man, you you have a commitment to church, and no matter where you were in your walk with God, to me, that was something that was impressive at that point in time. And so just seeing that and seeing how you spent your time and the type of person you were, the reserve that you carried yourself with, you weren't, jumping all over me or anything like that. Those were some of the things that spoke to me and were impressive. And so in my mind, I guess the wheels had already begun to turn. And so when we reached this particular point, without formally saying we're a couple, we're dating or anything like that, I had pretty much made up my mind and said, you know what, I'm gonna marry this young woman. And you had talked about what you were experiencing in terms of your healing. And of course, my healing process was already taking place, but a major breakthrough took place when I was wrestling over whether or not to ask you to marry me. Now, the wrestling wasn't because, well, is she this or is she that? Or, I think you checked all the proverbial boxes. But for me, what it was is I was afraid that after committing myself to you, that, there were things running through my mind like, well, what if she runs off with somebody else? Or what if she wakes up one morning and decides she doesn't love you anymore? Or, what if you guys are together and everything is going great and then she gets this terrible terminal illness? Or just anything bad that you can think of, where these were literally flooding my mind to the point where it was creating an almost uncontrollable anxiety about, well, what if this and what if that and what if the other? And it was a breakthrough moment in my life because it was as though someone tapped me on the shoulder. Now I believe with all my heart, and I know that it was the Lord, but tapped me on the shoulder and said, Stephen, love is a choice. There is no magical zap with a wand where when you say you love a person and they say they love you, that you guys are going to live happily ever after. There's never going to be any challenges. Love is a choice, which means, now that's not all it is. It's a lot of other things, certainly. But love is a choice, which means that it's something that must be reaffirmed every day. So it is very real and very a legitimate possibility that a person can say they love you and in fact can love you and then change direction, change heart, change mind or whatnot. And then I felt God was telling me, but that's the uniqueness of love. It involves a risk. It involves a willingness to be able to share the deepest parts of who you are and to share your life with someone who is making a day-by-day choice to commit themselves to you the same as you are committing yourself to them. And so with that tremendous breakthrough, not only did I have confidence to move forward with you, Tamara, but I also had perspective on the reason I had lived the type of life I had lived, running around and doing all types of foolishness. And I had perspective. It wasn't because, oh, I'm just out here like that and I'm this and I'm that. No, God was revealing to me, no, you were afraid of commitment and you were afraid of being hurt. And as a result, this is the reason why you wouldn't commit yourself to one person or one relationship. You wanted to have the proverbial doors of escape open so that you could never claim that your heart had actually been broken. And so that perspective and that healing for me, it really was preparatory for me to ask you to marry me.
So that's the first part. We want to ask you to take a break for a second. We'll come right back and we'll continue to hear about how did this actually manifest itself. This whole, how did you ask me to marry you, right? It's a very interesting story. Thank you guys. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys, to Stamina. Thank you guys for joining us. Video 2. This is the second half of us telling our story. And you had left off explaining about your fear of asking me to marry you, right? And whenever we talk about this, it generally throws people off quite a bit because we tell people we never really dated, right? Or at least according to the standards that most people, even myself, honestly, it threw me a loop, right? Because of my experiences with men. I had never been around a man that didn't at least attempt or try, even, I hate to say it, even a church guy, or a godly man, who didn't express some type or do something, touch you in some way or, kiss or any of those things. And we never even held hands, you know? And so in my mind, we weren't dating, you know, we were just friends, you know? So when your mom asked me to join her on a trip to come see you, I was excited, but I had no clue, you know, what was in store when I got down there.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I didn't just ask for you to marry me. I didn't just come to you with that. I'd actually spoken to your parents.
Yeah, you did.
Oddly enough, earlier when your grandmother had been in the hospital, and
a couple of years prior.
Yeah, and I'd gone to visit, and it was just your dad and I in the waiting room.
It's so embarrassing.
And he's big guy, you know. He comes, puts his hey son, big old beard. Son, I want you to know you have my permission. And I said, okay, sir, I have your permission to do what? You have my permission to marry my daughter. And I said, with all due respect, son, with all due respect, sir, I'm not interested in marrying your daughter. Oh, I know, but you will be. And when you do,
okay,
I want
Daddy.
you to know the answer is yes. And so, so when I called and I said, you know, you guys are aware that Tamara's getting ready to come down here, but I want you to know that when she comes down, I would like to ask her to marry me. And so I wanted to talk to you all first. Son, what did I tell you? I already gave you my answer, and you know what it is. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
so
my parents, they did. My grandmother loved you, you know, and my parents absolutely loved you as well. And I think, I know for sure that gesture of reaching out to my parents and speaking to my parents first, it wasn't just in a vacuum, right? It wasn't that my parents never met you before, because we got some janky situations where people just show up to the doorstep like, hey, I want to marry your daughter. But my parents had gotten the opportunity to get to know you, and, you know, and so I know that they, till this day, value the fact that you valued them enough, you know, to come to them first. And I think that that's so important to share with people, that it's not just about us. You know, our families had a huge role to play in us being able to have that process and also continue to have a successful marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you got down to Tennessee, explain what happened on that night.
It was interesting because, you know, again, I'm a hood girl. You know, when I say hood, I'm talking about I grew up with street lights. You know, you could hear sirens, helicopters. It was, you know, stuff going on. You know what I'm saying? And Tennessee was different for me. Tennessee was the country. People were really nice and sweet. Everybody waved at you, but nobody locked their doors, their car doors. Wasn't no house locks.
Well, that was until you got there, because you locked all the car
I locked right.
Mercy.
And no locks on the doors of the house. Like, it was just a different environment for me, you know. But most importantly, there were no street lights, you know. So when you riding on those roads, it was quite dark. And one evening, me and you and your mom, you know, we had been out and we had, you know, had a good day together. And we ended up going back to the place we were staying on camp where you were a teacher. And and you know, she got off the car and you asked me to stay in the vehicle, you know, and I'm like, oh, okay. And as I, you know, stayed in the vehicle, your mom went inside and we drove off down this dirt road, and it was dark. And literally I was just like, is this a Jason moment? Like, I'm sorry, but that's, my mind was just like, I don't know what to think. Like, you know, go back to what you learned, you know.
It wasn't Friday and it wasn't the 13th, so I don't know why you was thinking about Jason, but go ahead.
And but it was just, I was like, okay, where are we going? I had never, you know, been that deep in the woods in the country before, but we ended up at this beautiful cabin. And when we got inside, you know, there was a fireplace. It was so, you know, it was beautiful, you know, and we sat on the porch that overlooked this, I don't know, what was it called? The Bluff or the Tennessee Valley or something like that. And it was just gorgeous. And we spent some time talking, you know, and then, you know, we asked to go, cause we in Chile. So we went inside and we were sitting there, and it got a little awkward, you know, because you started to kind of get quiet, and, you know, whenever you do this thing, you start counting with your fingers. I didn't know what you were doing. I'm like, okay.
Is it 1, 2, 3? Let me kill it.
Right, you know what I'm saying? I'm like,
that's something crazy, huh?
I gotta go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom, and I literally was in the bathroom like, okay, look, if you try something, you know what I'm saying, do what your mama taught you. You know what I'm saying? Just chop. And I went back and sat down, and it was still a little awkward, but I could tell you had something like you wanted to say, you know. But eventually you did say something.
Yeah, and I was nervous. Obviously, first time, only time doing it.
Yeah.
And you actually said, what are you know, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And
I'm
I
like,
said,
what's going on with you?
I said, I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask you to marry me. And, you know, your response was like, what? And And I'm like, oh my
It
goodness.
literally was the strangest. You know how sometimes you have an inkling or a feeling that something's getting ready to happen, or and it just wasn't that way. And it was one of the sweetest moments ever, because what you actually did is you got up and you came over, you put your head in my lap, and you held my hands and you said, I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask you to marry me. I literally was in shock.
Yeah, and she gave the most romantic, it was such a beautiful response. She was like, I gotta go to the bathroom. Literally, and left me there on my knees in front of the chair, and she got up and went to the bathroom.
Yes,
and
that was the safest place for me to go at the time.
It was a weird situation. I'm like, okay, is this not gonna go well? But what were you thinking when you went to the bathroom?
I didn't know what to say. Like these moments, as a girl or as a young woman, you dream about them, right? And you expect that they're gonna happen in a certain way. And for sure, I had no inclination that you would ask me such a thing. And I told you guys earlier, one of the reasons was because, which we're going to talk about in a minute, was that you had never come to me and said, man, girl, I love you. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm so used to dealing with janky people, you know? And so I was just like, wow, he wants to marry me, And so when I came back out of the bathroom, I just kind of sat down and my mind was just like, okay, why? Like, what? And I remember asking you. Remember what I asked you? I was like, you have never. I don't know. I remember I was yelling. I don't know. I'm kind of hyper. But I was just like, man, you've never even told me that you love me, or anything like that. And you're always so calm and reserved. And your response was it was quite interesting. And I understood. After hearing your explanation, tell them what you said.
And I said to you, I said, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And the reason I haven't told you that I love you is because I've used that word loosely in so many other relationships that I've been in, and I have not really understood its meaning, and I've actually used it in a manipulative way, and so I'm still in the process of learning what it means to really and truly love someone, and so you're right, I haven't said that to you, but as much as I understand what love is, I can say to you that I do in fact love you, but I'm still learning,
And my response to that, literally, I felt in my mind like, please. I was like, this is some really good game, or like I was just still trying to sift through, like, what are you talking about, But I understood, eventually, because I really had to surrender what I thought love was. I thought love was sex. I thought love was somebody attempting to try to, someone coming and filling your head with all of these, or
someone simply just running their mouth and telling you, I love you, I love you, I love you.
But doing the opposite, and making you compromise. And then, so when I sat there and eventually, I'm like, well, are you asking me or are you telling me? And I remember you grabbed me, you were like, I'm asking you, will you marry me? And all I can remember was just saying, yeah, okay. That was my answer, yes. And it was just, I remember us just sitting there, like after that moment, just, and maybe this was like the precipice of us saying, okay, we are now in a relationship. And
not just in a relationship, but a relationship with a destination.
Yes.
And not just in a relationship, but there is a commitment to this relationship. Yeah. It's not just the commitment of, we ride or die. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Yeah, if I get locked up for the next 15 to 20, you're going to be there. No. It wasn't that. It was, look.
I want to live, the Lord. No, I don't want to die.
It's this relationship is based on a commitment that we have to one another. Yeah. It's based on a commitment that we have to one another's families. Yeah. And ultimately a commitment that we have to God. And in a short amount of time, we're going to be man and wife. Yeah. We're going to do everything and put all of our energies into working towards that.
And what was so amazing to me, and I was so happy, when I tell people, when I share and I try, when I talk to young women, that was one of the easiest decisions I've ever made in my life. And it was so weird. And I know when people hear it, they're like, man, that's kind of awkward. It was awkward, but it was one of the most peaceful decisions. I never once regretted. I never once doubted from that day forward, right, that this was the right decision. And the reason why I know that, for one, is because I know God was leading, you know. Two, our parents, you know, we had the support of our family members and the people that were behind us. I didn't have to compromise. You didn't have to compromise. I didn't have to sleep with you. You didn't have to sleep with me. We didn't have to do all of the other stuff. It was just like, it was nothing clouding our vision, you know, for the future. And it felt so good, you know. And so I remember just getting up from there and walking away from there like, wow, you know, like this is what it can feel like. Because I had been there before, where having a relationship with someone and feeling guilt all the time, you know, and I never felt that. And so I was just so grateful and thankful, you know, to that. And my parents were super, now that I realized, you know.
Yeah, and
like,
I told, of course, I let her know. Well, I actually called your parents and asked them, and she's
oh
like,
my
what?
goodness.
They knew that's what they were talking about.
Yeah, because they were acting weird. Like, I had to borrow some luggage from them, and the day before I left, they were just like, well, let's pray because life is going to be different. I'm just like, what is wrong with these people? You know, but they knew. And you know what? It is one of the greatest decisions I've ever made, you know, in my life. And I thank God for that.
Yeah, and you and I, we talk about the power of choices.
Yeah.
And for better or for worse, literally. And how each choice that we make, it you know, it has the potential to build on the next choice and the next choice and the next choice. And so I concur with you. One of the best decisions that I've ever made in my life. Yeah. Never regretted. And every decision that has been made from that decision, I can see how that decision has been such a blessing. It has been in God's order. Yeah. It has it's been a benefit to me, to you, and to those that God has blessed us to be able to come in contact with. Yeah. But however great that may seem,
because it sounds just like it's such a fairy tale, right? Such a love story, and the birds, and we go off into the sunset,
happily ever after. But in reality, just like all marriages, and notice we like to put a difference between marriage and wedding.
Oh yes, there is a difference.
When you look up marriage, you just type in marriage, you do a Google search, and what comes up are pictures of a wedding. Yeah. And many people believe that the wedding is the marriage. Yeah. And that's why people will spend thousands of dollars to have this ideal, pristine, beautiful wedding. Yeah. But the wedding is only one day. Yeah. And that maybe not even a full day. Yeah. But the marriage is something that is a lifetime by the grace of God. And so just a year into our marriage, Tamara has now moved down to Tennessee.
Well, once you asked me to marry you, we began doing marriage counseling, you know, after that, which was one of the great, and we tell people, listen, don't make the decision of getting married without participating in some type of marriage counseling.
Let's be real. Yeah. I was afraid of, you know, even though I'm a Christian and whatever, and you're a Christian or whatever, we're still afraid, at least I am, to go get marriage counseling. And I'm afraid that they're going to tell us, no, you shouldn't get married. Yeah. This is not in God's will. And, you know,
or you're not compatible, or, you know, all these different things that you come up with your mind.
And so I'm just like, okay, now we've gotten this far. Now we're going to come over here and these people are going to tell us, shut it down, you know.
What do you say? Shut it down.
Shut it down, yeah. But actually had a fantastic experience. Yes. Which was, it was personally gratifying, nurturing, maturing. And as a couple, it was as well. In fact, we still use some of what you will experience is what we ourselves experienced in our first pre-marriage counseling.
And they were, the couple was such a blessing, a sweet old couple, you know, Mr. Bob and Miss Ruthie. And I remember just him, you know, being so practical, and him scratching his beard, you know, talking and just sharing how different him and his wife were, and yet how they had to work through, you know, some things. And man, they had been married at that point until how long?
Oh, it had been a couple of decades, for sure.
Yes, for sure. It was beautiful.
And there was another thing that was transformative and foundational for us, along with the pre-marriage counseling we received. What was that?
We were given the opportunity, I guess it was like a set, right? I don't know if any of you have recall or are aware of a couple called Ron and Nancy Rocky. They have a ministry that they had launched some years ago called Binding the Wounds. And I'm telling you, that if it were not for being introduced to that at the beginning stages of our courtship and our marriage together, I know for sure that we probably wouldn't be here today.
Yeah, this was within the first year, and I think we probably got them a couple of months. My mom and dad had gone through a series.
Yeah, and my parents even were able to attend their workshops, and it was something.
They went through the Bonding the Wound series, and then my mom purchased a whole series of cassettes.
Yeah.
And she gave them to us, and we listened to them together.
Cassette tapes.
Yeah, that was like, but we listened to them as we were in the car, and when we would go down to town, and then even when we were at home, press stop, and we'd reflect and talk. And I was saying things about myself, she was saying things about herself. So these things were like, they were extremely, extremely important in terms of us having a strong foundation.
And it truly built a muscle for us to begin being people to communicate. You know, like, you think you communicate with someone, you think you know each other, but you don't realize how much you don't know, right, about one another. And that exercise of that muscle, because I know in my home, we didn't do that. We didn't talk about certain things, and maybe the same for you. And so it created this atmosphere for us to be able to open up and talk and communicate, which I think really helped us.
Yeah, well, in my home, we did talk a lot, but what one of the ways that it helped me, I was very critical, is it helped me to be able to stop looking with an intent to blame. So if I'm feeling emotionally disturbed, what did you do to make me feel this way?
Yeah.
So I didn't know how to take responsibility for my own emotions. And going through that seminar, it had a profound impact on me, because it helped me to be able to take ownership for the way that I felt, my emotions. It helped me to stop looking at her, actually to be my source of happiness.
Yeah.
Right? And man, I tell you talking about paradigm shifting, you know, life changing, 100, you know, I mean, just all of the little things that you can think of to describe this. That's how profound it was. And I have no doubt, as you mentioned, Tamara, that one of the reasons why our marriage has been blessed is because of having these things, and not just having them 15, 20 years after we were married, but having them, you know, not only during the beginning stages, but also in that first year, having some mind-altering truths.
Some of the most critical times are the first few years of marriage, and exposing that all of us bring baggage. All of us, even the greatest of homes that you could be raised in, you still bring baggage with you.
Yeah, and I want to say this. Even though you know some of the things that you'll learn in this series, it's not going to make living through the challenges that you live through any less complicated. Case in point, within the first few months of our being married, you had some very, very interesting news. What was it?
I did. I had some very interesting news, and if you want to hear about that, come back and join us in a moment.
So what's all this interesting news that you got within the first few months after we got married?
Literally, a month after our wedding, which was so awesome, I was experiencing something I had experienced before, as I told you, but for me, I had thought this was the perfect, thing. I'm married and things are going great. And our plan was to wait to have children until maybe about 2 years later. Well, that wasn't God's plan. And so what actually ended up happening is I just wasn't feeling good. And I know we had gone someplace. We had went down to visit a couple of our friends in North Carolina. And one of them came up to me and was like, man, you're pregnant. I'm like, nah, I ain't pregnant. So we've only been married for, no, we're waiting 2 years. Now, case in point, and maybe this is something you need to think about. Maybe I should have thought about birth control. I don't know. It just wasn't even anywhere part of the thing. I don't know why I thought I couldn't be pregnant. Right? And so
that's not fully true. Actually, you were doing birth control, but you were having some reactions that you weren't quite comfortable with, and you were switching. And so going through that was a process. That
definitely was a process. And so I left, I ignored what she was saying. We got back home, and another friend approached me and said, you know what? I think you're pregnant. I'm like, absolutely not. I'm not pregnant, and I was smelling things cooking from the calf, and it was just making me so sick. I'm like, oh, this is horrible. Well, we went to the BILO one day, down in town, and I wanted to use the bathroom, and she snuck me a little pregnancy test under the door, and I'm like, oh, so I took the test and I handed it back to her, and all I heard on the other side of that door was jumping up and down, you're pregnant. I'm just like, I wanted to pass out on the toilet at the Bilo. But I got the test. We drove back up the mountain, and you know.
Yeah, she met me. I was getting off work, dirty, tired, funky. You know, just walking, covered with soot or dirt or whatever. And she's like, "Oh, come here. I got something to tell you." And she's got this paper bag she's holding. She's like, "Yeah, I went down and here, just look in the bag and tell me." And I'm like, are we drinking now? Are we doing drugs? And then you handed me a paper bag talking about look in it. So I open it up. I pull the test out. I didn't know what it was. And I'm like, well, what is this? She's like, it's a pregnancy test. Look at it. And I'm like, okay. I still don't know what this is. And she's like, well, I'm pregnant, And when she said those words, I'm pregnant, we're going to have a baby. All of a sudden, it was like in a movie where you just leave where you are and then your mind just, it goes to this other thing and these pictures start flashing by your mind. And I'm thinking and asking myself myriads of questions like, man, am I going to be able to be a good father? What is my child going to think about me? And, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if so all of these things are going through and it's almost like an anxiety thing, but it's happening in my own mental bubble. And the crazy thing is in the meantime, you're having an experience in your mental bubble too. What was your experience?
My experience was reflecting on shame that I had carried from having an abortion from some years prior, and I felt like at that moment I'm doing things differently now, right? I'm married, I'm doing things the right way. And so, we didn't have Instagram and Facebook back then, but I'm thinking about the reveal, I'm thinking about like, this is going to be so great. And I didn't get the response right from you. Matter of fact, I didn't get any response and you're not responding at all.
You did get a response because either later that night or the next day when I came out of my mental bubble,
right, I
was like, yes.
But at the moment, I was already dealing with my own personal struggles and thoughts. And so, is this another one of those moments? Do I need to be ashamed? And it's like, no, those are my fears. Those were my things that was happening. And so you had two people who were in their bubbles, you know what I'm saying? And our bubbles were colliding,
Yeah.
And it was just creating this moment. It was, and I said a moment, right? Yeah. Because the moment did pass, but at that moment, we had to work through, that process. Even though,
and we're talking about the difficulty of working through some things, even though that created a moment, the reality is that the residual effects of that, the residual effects of that disappointment that Tamara experienced, it literally did not shift until we conceived our second child. Yeah. And then I had the balloons, I had the cake, I had the little thing on, and doing all of that stuff. But I got excited when I came out of my mental bubble, and I'm like, yes. Yeah. And she was like, oh, it's too late now, and I'm like, well, but the crazy thing is, it would be a couple of months. Yeah. Maybe even a year or so before I could actually, before I was actually able to articulate exactly what was going through my mind when she told me that she was pregnant, and it would be time before she was able to articulate what she was experiencing, and when she shared what she was experiencing, and I shared what I was experiencing, then it made sense. Yeah. Like her response to my non-response made sense. Yeah. Right?
And we're going to be sharing a little bit about that throughout this series. Talking about how there's this thing called the fear dance, and that's what we were in. We didn't even realize it.
We didn't realize it, but it literally, the residual effects of that moment lasted far longer than it needed to. Yeah. But again, because we were still learning and whatnot, it was a challenge. But by God's grace, we had the tools. We may not have been using them, but we had the tools to be able to work through that situation. Yeah. And so it's been profound. Yeah. And we could share so many more stories.
So much more, yeah.
So many more stories, but that is just the very beginning. And here's the important thing. Our story is still being written. Oh, yeah. Almost 20 years. 4 children. Yeah. And
moves moves and
from Tennessee to
ministry
New York
and changes
to
and,
Michigan to Ohio to Michigan and who knows where. God is still he's still writing our story. And so we hope that this will be some sort of an encouragement to you, and also just a snippet to let you get to know who we are and what our journey has been and is moving forward, and what our story is. Now, what we want to do is we want to challenge you. Once this finishes, you're going to have some homework, but we want to challenge you to begin to tell your story. That is, how did you meet? When did she first catch your eye? When did he first catch your eye? What were the various different things that were working in your minds, at least, to bring you two together? So it's not just about our story. It's about yours too.
And we don't want you to be intimidated by our story either, because everybody's different. God is working in people's lives so differently, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of a background of who we are. And so share and talk to one another, about your particular backgrounds and your experiences, your upbringing, right? Where you come from, your parents, your life, whatever that may be. That's going to be so vital and so important throughout this process of going through these next few videos. All right, stay tuned for the homework assignment. Hey guys, so you have some homework to do. Today, we're gonna ask you guys to participate in writing down your expectations. Yes, your expectations. What do we mean when we say expectations?
Now, we mentioned in telling our story that the couple that we did pre-marriage counseling with, they asked us to do some exercises, and this was one of them. So expectations, it's what you expect your spouse to be or to do. If you expect your spouse to make pancakes and fruit and have fresh hot maple syrup to go with your pancakes every morning, write that down. If you expect your spouse to pick up after themselves when they get out of the shower or so forth and so on, write that down. If you expect your spouse to help with the housework, write that down. If you expect your spouse to, and on and on. There's nothing too small, right? And there's nothing too big in terms of this list of expectations. Now, what we don't want you to do is what a lot of couples do. Well, I expect that they will love me. Love me.
Stop lying.
And put the top back on the toothpaste. Be real.
Right.
So don't just, love is enough. No, it ain't.
Thank you.
And you'll understand why once we get into the next session. You'll understand why this is so very important. But we ask couples to do this, and we ask you to do it separately.
Yes.
So that your list is not prejudiced by the presence of, your significant other. So we want you in your own personal time to write down your list of expectations. And you will not share those with each other until you come together again for the next episode. So before you watch the next episode, the first thing we want you to do is we want you to open up your list of expectations and share one with another.
Yes. So remember, guys, it's important. No matter how many there are, there better be more than 10. But we want you to write down as many as that you can think of that comes to your mind, and then we will talk about them in the next session.
See you soon.